I thank Najim, Sanjeev. I thank you all for allowing me to visit you, and it's an honor to be here. I gave a seminar here at Johns Hopkins when I had just finished my PhD back in 1988, before most of you were born, I'm guessing. And so it's a pleasure to come back. I actually gave a seminar to the medical center on our work on cochlear implants, like maybe 4 years ago or 3 years ago during the pandemic. So it's a pleasure and honor to be here. I greatly appreciate it. So today I'm going to be talking about aspects related to diarization, speech recognition for naturalistic data. And when we're looking at naturalistic data, there's some unique challenges that we have to face in order to overcome this. So we're going to be looking at two domains. First, classroom settings, looking at young children in this space. And the second is actually looking at Apollo data and the NASA communications. So I'll say that just a word or two. I know Hopkins is nationally, internationally known for all the work that you do in speech and language technologies and so forth. But I just highlight a couple of things for our group in UT Dallas. We've got a number of labs in the Center for Robust Speech Systems. Myself, I look at the speech technology lab. I've got about maybe 10 or so students there. The cochlear implant lab, we get support from NIH for the last 10 years or more in that space. And then we have another lab that I oversee, that's the UT Drive lab, that looks at driver modeling and distraction aspects there. So those are three labs that I kind of oversee. We've had a number of labs also associated with the center. Carlos Busso, who just became IEEE fellow this past year, oversees the multimodal signal processing lab. Carlos is one of the most wonderful folks I've ever met in my life, and we're so happy to have recruited him to UTD and having him participate in all the work that his team does. Barak Zisman is a recent faculty member we recruited, and we're really excited to have her join our institution and make an impact as well. She does a lot of work in the synthesis domain and also related to speech and speaker modeling components. We've had several faculty members that have had labs. Yang Liu was in our computer science department. She's since moved on to industry, but is very active still in the field. Jen Wang was in our bioengineering department. He looked at non-acoustic sensor type speech recognition, primarily for people with ALS and other communication disorders, but in bioengineering. He's moved on to a speech sciences program at the University of Texas at Austin. Raja was director actually at Texas Instruments for the speech and audio group there for many years, and had a second career at UTD, was with us for close to about 20 years. He's now retired, but still participates in all of our students' PhD exam committees, and he's provides a lot of wisdom to our students on what to think about as they move forward. And the person I can't say enough about is Philip Luiso. He was one of the most inspirational people that I've known in my life. He unfortunately passed away about 10 years ago. But Philip was one of the most humble individuals I've ever known, an excellent person in the area of speech enhancement and cochlear implant work. And a lot of the work that we continue to do in the implant lab is directly because of Philip's groundbreaking work in the early stages of how implants are being designed. So for our group here, these are the students that are currently working in the speech technology space. We have several that are in the forensics area, some that work on child speech, others that are involved on this Apollo NSF project. We've got several that look at accent, language, and speaker ID tracking. So all of these students continue to be active. I think we've got two that will probably finish this year for PhDs. In the implant lab, we've got a number of students that are active there. Julie Saba was one of our PhD students that stayed on as a staff member. And Ram Chandrasekhar is also a staff member right now, helping on a number of pieces. We do a lot of things on implant processing and looking at the physiology of how you can leverage technologies to try and help people with hearing loss and who have cochlear implants. I mentioned a number of the folks that are in the UT Drive lab, a number of staff members, and we always have 3 transcription specialists that are usually brain behavioral sciences students or speech language pathology students that are involved. I will also say that in my career, I've done a lot of things, but quite frankly, I'd be sitting in an office kind of, twiddling my thumbs if I didn't have outstanding students. So These are the students that I've finished. So I've done 100 students now. I joined the Century Club, so to speak, 59 PhDs and 41 master's thesis students. So out of all these students, 2 are IEEE fellows. 1 is a branch chief for the FDA. 1 is a vice president for a company that had $65 billion in sales last year. And I'm a geeky, I think humble type person. I'm just happy to see students become really successful in their careers. And so my hope is that all students go off and do great things in their lives. Got a bunch of master's students. A number of those also went on to do PhDs, either with us or with other groups. So again, happy to see those students be successful. So the outline here, we're going to talk a bit about naturalistic communications, a little bit about the diarization work, and then shift to some of the application domains. I talked with Najim last night because I've given talks before where maybe I didn't have as much, I would say technical details. I have a little bit of the technical details here that I will try to incorporate just to make sure that those of you that are experts in the area will see some of the good things. And those of you that aren't, that are interested more. So the 2 domains we're looking at, one is looking at the educational space. So we look at young children as well as college students that are looking at trying to do team-based type conversational analysis on trying to learn math, chemistry, physics, and biology, STEM type classes. And then the other application is in massive audio sets for the Apollo program to see whether we can pull the audio from that. So if you're looking at kind of speech communication, historically, people focused on 2-way conversations, typically in the telephony type applications. People would kind of talk on the phone and you just have, a landline type system there, and that's how you talk. Most technologies in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s maybe focused on things like this. But if you look over the last maybe 10 or 15 years, there's a lot more emphasis now, instead of just 2-way as a group. So now it becomes more as a group. And I think there's not a lot of good things that you can say have come out of COVID-19, but at least with the pandemic, the use of Zoom, MS Teams, WebEx as opportunities to kind of collaborate with people that aren't physically in the same location now allows us to look at capturing the audio and the video and seeing how people interact. And how people interact maybe on online systems is very different than if you're sitting around a table in a room. Just the dynamics are very different. So naturalistic data is going to be kind of the core processing domain that we'll see most of the speech technology going forward, not so much carefully controlled collections that you might have seen 20 or 30 years back, multi-speaker context, big data, and so forth. So moving on, I always put this one picture up because I found this book I went and picked it up, and it was authored by this guy called Alexander Graham Bell. I don't understand why someone decided to pitch that book, but they did. And I got the book. I would have brought it with me, and I was kind of excited because when I opened it up, I saw it was signed. And I said it was signed by Alexander Graham Bell. I would have been, off my chair. But it was signed by somebody else in the speech field. So, but a pretty senior person. It was signed, I think, in 1956, so way before I was born. But in any event, the images and things that you saw in Bell's book really looked at the physiology of how you do speech modeling and speech production. And while many of these now aren't at the forefront now when we're looking at machine learning-based solutions, they do represent still the core aspects on how we produce speech and how we look at the language aspects there. So incorporating some of that is important. Diarization, clearly, those of you obviously that are knowledgeable in the field kind of know when you're looking at the diarization, you can either do full speech recognition, so you're generating the text content there. Keywords would be another area that you might pull off to try and get that information. But looking at the ID and tracking aspects for turn taking become important. Another aspect kind of play a role, and being able to kind of use these in a constructive way become important in looking at knowledge and representation there. Unfortunately, there are commercial-based systems out there like smart speaker systems, Amazon Alexa. If you're looking at smartphones like Apple Siri and maybe Samsung I'm trying to remember Bixby and Ding Dong for JD and other systems. Challenging for those technologies to be. Theory can, but now if you're sitting in a room and there's reverberation or other factors in there, the system doesn't work so well. So being able to overcome those challenges are important. Basically, the notion here is that you always have mismatch. It's everywhere, and it's not going to get easier as you're going forward. So, looking at the speaker-based variabilities, technology-based challenges, and finally conversational-based issues, all these represent variabilities. A little figure here in the lower left-hand side is one that I put together probably about 25 years ago, and it's one that I kind of carry along with me. Basically, all types of production variabilities are very difficult. If you looked at a lot of the areas that people looked at for robustness in speech technology, a lot of them looked at the microphone that you used, or maybe the cell phone that you were using. But if you look at that technology, I don't say it's easy, but it's easier to address a microphone mismatch or a handset or landline type mismatch than it is for speaker variability. If the person's under stress, emotion, or some other production characteristics that are different, it makes it much more challenging to overcome those things. So things that we've actually done a lot of work on, vocal effort, we've done a lot on whisper speech, Lombard effect. We probably have more than 50 publications in that space, but a variety of other areas as well in terms of trying to overcome these variabilities. Next, kind of looking and saying, well, if you're looking at the distance-based side of things, you can see performance here. This is just some of the benchmarks performance for speech recognition. And you can see resource management, Wall Street Journal, these have all, kind of gone down. The switchboard corpus, all the error rates have gone down. The thing that hasn't gone down is when you look at the distance-based characteristics. Any distance-based voice capture is still a major challenge in the field. And now you see the deployment of smart speaker systems in homes and other environments, you're much more likely to get distance-based voice capture. So those of you that might be working in the speech recognition or speaker ID area, if you're adding a dimension on for distance-based voice capture or reverb or noise suppression, these are all expertise that are really good to kind of bring to bear for your systems. So if you're looking, we did some work where we said, well, let's try to look at classroom settings and let's try to see if we can get some audio that might be really reverberant. So this is a team of folks that we had. The gentleman at the front there with the shirt, that's actually Hinnick Bourgel. I can't say his last name correctly. The R with the little caret on top is the most difficult phoneme from the Czech language for me and probably for any other people that's trying to learn Czech. But Hinnick was one of our staff members for 8 years. He's now a faculty member up in Wisconsin. And Aldous is right next to her. She now works for the FDA, and her boss is my first PhD student, Srinasan Kumar, who's branch chief of the FDA. And these are two collaborators from University of Kansas we continue to collaborate with. But we went and collected audio kind of in this classroom setting, and then we were in a racquetball court. We figure the most reverberant space you can get to is probably a racquetball court. So I'll play some of the audio on this.
Use a pencil to write the first draft.
Okay. And then what you hear if you were capturing it in a distance-based mic in the racquetball court.
Use a pencil to write the first draft.
Okay, so it sounds really bad, and that's what you might get if you're looking at kind of these pieces. One of the parts here, we collected that audio. We had lots of people in there reading, and we also did cases where we have them wear personal recorders. These are Lena units, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But capturing this type of audio is particularly useful for looking at kind of distance-based capture. The Lena Foundation was established or came out of a company called Infoture, but it's a nonprofit organization. It's set up primarily to look at child language development, 8 months of age to 36 months. The husband and wife that started that, Terry and Judy Paul, were the two that started Infoture and then Lena Foundation. And so their goal was to try and advance child language development. So that's where the Lena Foundation came from. Two of my students, Umit and Sharmi, developed all the software for this early on, and it's still used today. And And so we've been working with them to provide technology advancements, algorithms to help them out along the way. We created something called Prof Lifelog, where a geeky prof, I'll say, would wear this lunar recorder for the whole day, get typically 17 hours of recording, and anything that he did in that day got recorded on that audio. And when this person was a department head, he'd meet with faculty and have other things. If there were personal type issues, like maybe salary or other stuff, we turned the recorders off. But unfortunately, we kept it on for everything else. And so the students that were transcribing this kind of knew, like when I went to the bathroom, so it wasn't necessarily a pleasant thing for me. But I live with that. What you give up for science, you do this, right? And so this part, I think, looked a lot at how naturalistic audio comes into play. From that audio, now we're able to do things like monitor naturalistic diarization. So here on the top part of this graph here, you can kind of see turn taking for different conversations. So we looked at, from the audio itself, whether you're getting speech or just background silence. Can you detect the environment that you're in? So we know a certain number of rooms, they have certain room acoustics and background noise. So from that, we can actually characterize which room you're in just from the background acoustic signature. And then looking at the speakers themselves, which speaker is the primary speaker and other speakers that are talking. For HIPAA and IRB constraints, we never identified the speakers. We list them as A, B, C, D, so forth. So we can see the speaker turns. We can look at the environmental location. And these factors are particularly helpful for what's called EMA, or ecological moment analysis. So being able to tag the audio content in the context of where actually the audio is being captured is an important thing. People do this in a lot of the medical or biomedical applications these days. This was years back, but Abhijit Sanwan, one of our top PhD students, he went to find a company on technologies for voice background systems, worked on what are called phonological feature analysis. So we built speech recognition engines, primarily looking at phonological features to try and build keyword spotter systems. And with that, we were able to kind of start doing some tracking on this naturalistic data. This kind of shows the basic pipeline here, an ASR engine here. We get the phone confusion networks that come out of that. And from the phone confusion networks, we can build threshold systems that then identify which keywords are present. And from that, we can tag what the environmental context or the topic ID might be for that conversation. So applying this to all types of data, if you're looking at, let's say, timid data, it's nice and clean. You see you get a false alarm rate, miss rate that's quite good. If you move to, let's say, the switchboard corpus, performance drops down. That's two-way conversation, but still quite clean. Then we look at Prof Lifelog. That's the naturalistic data. For Prof Lifelog, we actually captured audio at a number of the interspeech conferences for poster sessions, going to the banquets and so forth, and looking to see how bad they are in those areas. We have, in our support from the Air Force for 18 years, we used what was called collected actually in India, all speaking English. The noise levels there were quite extreme. And then the DARPA RATS project, we were obviously one of the core participants with the SRI team on that, and built speech recognition engines for Arabic and Farsi. So the keyword spotting on the RATS part, they were for Arabic and Farsi keywords. And then obviously looked at other technologies there. But you looked and see that the performance drops off pretty significantly as the amount of noise and distortion increases there. So it tells you that you can still accomplish some base things, but what happens is you have to overcome, you have to decide what you want to use. If the speech recognition performance drops so drastically, then you may drop back and just use keywords to try and look at the topic or what's being discussed there. So this just shows that for the environmental sniffing task, we're able to look at the different environments that the person in the Prof Lifelog context here was moving around. And we could look where they were indoors and outdoors and how much time they spoke. And the other thing we did is we built a keyword, not a keyword spotter, a word counter system. And from the word counting system, we could count the number of words that were spoken for the 17-hour recording each day. And this was particularly helpful when my dean asked me, Are you engaging with your faculty and your students? And we could say, well, here are 9 days, and we can see that on each day, the number of words that I spoke, this is me talking here. I had some days where I only had 5,000 words I was speaking. You can see those are pretty light days. But then other days I'd have 52,000, 53,000, and 57,000 words spoken. So that's a lot of words in one day, right? But then, I had really good documentation when I went to my dean, and he said, well, are you engaging with your faculty? And I go, yeah, I can look at the faculty meetings. If I look at those 9 days, 78,000 words engaged with faculty meetings. For student meetings, 63,000, and for research meetings, 62,000.
So let's ask what the faculty talking, not me.
Unfortunately, they're me talking. But I'm talking, but the thing is, you're usually seeing like a balance on that. So on the faculty meetings, it's me running the faculty meetings when I was department head. So, I'd talk, but we'd have typically a 2-hour faculty meeting once a month. So it was me talking during giving the overview, but then faculty kind of giving presentations and so forth. So this was really just kind of tagging things. So it's kind of like when you're looking at your smartphone, it tells you the number of steps you take in a day. Here you can look at the number of words that you might produce. Okay. So we did that for kind of Prof Lifelog. We switched and said, well, let's try to look at this in the teaching space. So in the United States, there are about 85 universities that have what's called peer-led team learning. And the way this is set up is faculty are not involved with this. Basically, it's a student-driven type effort. You typically have between 6 to 8 students in a room, and typically one lead student that basically is running this. You're taking undergrad courses, either math, chemistry, physics, or biology. And the faculty member teaching the course will give the students, a sheet that says, these are the topics we're covering today. And so the students will kind of say, okay, the two of you solve these problems over here. You two solve these, you two solve these. So all the walls in their spaces are all marker boards. So they can write floor to ceiling. They're not allowed to bring, actually, this one student here, you can see she has her cell phone down there. That's illegal. She's not allowed to have a laptop or a cell phone in the room because we don't want them in there. And then the students break off in pairs and they talk about how they solve things. And they do that for about a half an hour. Then they come back and they take turns standing up and explaining to everyone else how they solve the problem. And the ability to actually go back and explain to someone else how you solve the problem is an ideal reinforcement process for learning. And so what we do is we capture the audio here. The PLTL team here, they basically get, this sells out in the first day and a half. It's kind of, I'm a guy who grew up in New Jersey, so it's like sleeping out for Springsteen tickets. They go instantly. And here they know if you sign up for this, your grade point average for that class will go up by 0.5, guaranteed. And they can see it, they show it. So all the students want to jump in and do this. So we capture all the audio. We've been doing the analysis here, and we're giving feedback back to the instructors on how better to engage the folks here. We took that effort and kind of migrated now to younger children. This is our collaboration with Dwight Irwin and Jay Bushert from the University of Kansas. And these look at what we call mics. It's basically for young children. We look at classroom settings, and we're trying to see how adults and children are interacting. Where are they learning? Basically in classroom settings, if they're going to museums or in the households. The other part is to see, is there any way to look quantitatively at the audio and be able to give effective feedback to the teachers or the parents on whether you're getting enough, I would say, language nourishment, if that's, you want to use that term, to try and emphasize the quality of the engagement. So I could say with the Lena Foundation, if you're looking at these audio recorders for 8 months of age, on an average, you'd like to have at least 10,000 words spoken to an infant every day. That's a bare minimum. Low language space is like 5,000 to 8,000. Moderate is maybe 10,000 to 15,000 words. In a high language environment, exposure for an infant is maybe somewhere between 18,000 to 25,000 words. Okay. Now, in the work that we've done, interacted with Lena Foundation, we found examples where mostly the female is having more interaction with the infant than the adult male. We've seen cases where the female has maybe 18,000 words in one day to the infant, and the adult male has 10 words. Okay, they're not so good. So you want to have a little bit more balance there. And that it's not to say that you're putting one of the spousal or the child rearing parents on notice, but trying to kind of gets a little bit more balanced there, kind of helps. So here we're looking at the diarization side. Primary child, secondary child, the adult, and non-speech. Those are kind of the core things we're trying to separate out. And you can see the color coding that sits on the bottom here. We want to be able to break those things apart. In the Lena Foundation software, they actually do provide this. It's pretty basic in what it does. We've never used any of their software. Our former students developed it. It's actually made available to all those that have it. But we end up jumping to other components to use that. So here we did some data collection in classroom settings, again, using the Lena unit and capturing that part. The other thing we also do is we kind of try to track where the student might physically be or the child might be. These are younger children, so it's a little bit more difficult to kind of keep track of them. They tend to move around a little bit like shadow. If you're looking at your pet dog, they're moving all over the place, right? So here, one of the environments that we're doing data collection in is Science City. This is a museum that's more of a hands-on experiential, I'm not sure if that's the right word, for children to basically engage with science. And so there's, different labs that they can pop in there and they get to see things. We were doing some work on this side, and one of the things we had some challenges with is we did find a few children that were really up on their dinosaurs, right? So we were getting some of these expressions like a dimetrodon, a antrosaurus, I don't know what an antrosaurus is, a podosaurus, I don't know what a podosaurus is, Physalopus. I have no idea what these are, but there's several children who were really up on their dinosaurs and knew them very well. They weren't in our lexicon, so we actually had to go and start populating them. So my students were kind of confused on whether these were made up names or real names, but we found they were there. So in the diarization side, obviously you have the primary child and the teacher, or sorry, the adult. And in this case, in Science City, they're kind of moving around, they're in open spaces, so you're more likely to kind of get more challenging environmental audio content there. In setting this up, you start off with the multi-speaker audio. You're going to do diarization, who spoke what when, the speaker recognition, what was spoken, and then you're moving down here to try and give some type of feedback either to the teachers, practitioners, or the parents to say, yes, you're having good engagement, or no, you need some more interactions there. So that's the pipeline there. The traditional approach, so this is one that we had set up maybe a couple of years back. We use weighted finite state transducers on there for the decoder. Acoustic model set up here on the left. Primarily, you're looking at phone level type recognition, and then maybe trying to do a mapping from the phones to words in the lexicon setup. And then the language model, you try to figure out, what was being said at the word level or sentence level. So these are what we were doing for the classroom. Or the field and recordings maybe in the Science City space. Some of the challenges here, I'll say that when you're looking at child speech systems, the vast majority of research in child speech typically goes for children that are 6 years of age to 18, in that range. And by the time a child reaches 6, assuming they're typically developing, they're able to maybe form words. You're more challenged with the acoustic models don't necessarily match the vocal tract characteristics, and maybe the grammar structure is not completely correct. Maybe the words are not placed in the right way. But you typically don't have many issues with developing physiology or developing brain characteristics for learning how to speak. When you're dealing with 2.5 to 5-year-olds, you now have a dramatically different problem in there because the children aren't able to produce full words. They produce word fragments. My son and daughter, twins that we adopted, he couldn't say computer or pizza when he was a young boy. He would say pooter and piba. And mom and dad knew pooter was, Papa's pooter. And, the pizza was what we would have maybe on a Saturday night. So he go, I want piba and I want Papa to get off his pooter, right? So we knew what that meant, but, your lexicon won't have that. So you have lots of disfluencies that you might have for young children's speech like this, and maybe non-speech vocalizations, lots of I don't want to say yawning, but coughing, sneezing, crying, laughing, shouting, all kinds of things in there. 2 to 5-year-olds don't understand protocols. Like if mom or dad's talking, they'll just blurt out stuff. They don't wait. If you're looking at 6 to maybe 12-year-olds, if they have any schooling experience, like in a classroom, then they kind of know that if mom or dad's talking, they should wait. And then when they talk, hopefully mom and dad lets them talk. So that process makes it more difficult to look at diarization tools for those children. So again, note here, mostly older children in this space, a little less focus maybe on naturalistic settings. Most of the time, children might be wearing, or older children, 6 to 18 might be wearing head-mounted microphones, maybe sitting in front of a computer, looking at some interactive systems. Our previous group, when we were at Colorado Boulder, was legendary for looking at things there. Wayne and Ron were doing things in that space. Looking here at younger children, 2.5 to 5 is more difficult. And there's very little corpora that are available out there. Part of that is because they are young children. HIPAA and privacy laws don't really allow you to share that. In addition to that, in our case, typically 25% of the kids are at-risk kids, either Down syndrome, learning or language delay, maybe some form of autism. So a number of other factors that may come to play. We work with Collier Center, the communication center in Dallas that's part of UTDallas. And they have about maybe 300 kids that are in kind of their learning daycare space every day. So we've got like a living lab that one could capture audio if you wanted to from that space. And they're mainstream. You have kids that are at risk and kids that are typically developing. You get to see how they interact with each other. So here on the diarization side, for ASR, we have a TDNN method with a CNN-based system and using attention models on that. For the language model of current neural network setup we had for this, we're getting a 40% word error rate. So if you're looking at young kids and if you go talk to any major company and you say you got 40% word error rate, they'll basically say, we don't care. It's just too bad. But for us, when you're having children that actually can't maybe articulate most of those words to start with, you kind of have to skip over that. So we can look at these things and find performance there. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. Raza was one of our staff members. She originally came from from Lithuania, but was in Limsey in France for a number of years, and then was with us. And she still keeps collaborating with us on some work on child speech. This was a paper we had in SpeechComm, and we looked here at kind of the learning space like this. You can see the leaning unit in the upper right-hand side. We have something called UbiSense that's sitting here. UbiSense is an RFID tag that you clip onto the child. And as the child moves around in the space, you can track where the child is. Particularly helpful in these learning spaces because you have lots of times different concentration or stations that are set up where you can kind of get the information. So in this setup, you can see down here, you have something on books and reading and art and science. So we can kind of find out where are the children talking with the teacher or talking with their peers and kind of learning these spaces. So kind of understanding that dynamics is particularly helpful. Here was some of the analysis. We looked at word counts and word characteristics from the children. The 100 most frequently occurring words here, most were stop words, I, of, the, it, and, or. But you get other words like ones that are social or question or animal-based. So those are pieces. We also look at parts of speech. So you can look at the distribution here. Many of them are verbs or nouns. That's good. Adjectives also are good. So you can kind of see the types of things there. In the communication up here at the top, you can see the 100 frequently most occurring words on the left. And you can see 1,500 words or all other words for this group of audio files we analyzed, all represent the other words. But those 100 words you can see are used 14,000 plus words here. So on the left, it tells you the 100 most frequently occurring words are being used more than half the time when you're looking at these words. So it tells us that certain words are being used over and over again by the young children. The other piece we can look at is single syllable words for the children are quite common, and multi-syllable words are not used as much. And if you're looking at the syllable structure, we can do something similar on the right-hand side there for looking at the syllable structure for all the words that the children are producing. And we look here, the 100 most frequently occurring words. Yes, there are a lot of stop words in the front there, but there are also other words like kitties and I don't know. Yeah, I thought I was from Texas here. I was thinking barbecue was in there, but I don't see barbecue in there. Yeah, so but other some multi-syllable words, mostly single syllable words, CVCs are what we normally would see. Here we're just looking at different children some that are delayed. There are actually several in here that have either Downs or autism. And we can look at the verbs. We can also look at sentence structure there. One of the things that we do look at is something called the WH words. So that's who, what, when, where, why, and how. So these 6 words are particularly important if a child asks a question or an adult or a teacher asks the question. If you ask who, what, when, and where, these are all factual type questions. They usually demand a really short response. The name, the place, the location, something like this. The 2 question words, why and how. If you ask those 2 question words, you're much more likely to get a more elaborate response there. And so children are asking that, you know that they're more engaged and they're going to have more interactions there. So that's one of the things we're trying to track to see those WH words. And this is kind of a cool thing. This shows kind of the conversational interaction and the location where the conversations are taking place. So the heat map here tells us where we have the most words being exchanged. So if you're in a learning space, what you can now do is look to decide, how do I optimize the learning space to maximize voice conversation interaction in there? Now, okay, we're not going to go into the bathrooms there. You can see it's over on the right-hand side, but in the other places, you see that there's certain areas where there's more conversation. You can look whether it's the teacher talking or whether it's the child talking. There's a reading space here where maybe the teacher is reading, pauses, and asks the children to respond on things. So the heat map here becomes really innovative for teachers because they don't really care about the speech recognition. They're kind of looking more at, am I actually engaging with the child? Is he or she actually getting the vocal or language nourishment that they need? And if we look at the typically developing kids and the kids that are at risk, do we need to provide more support for the kids that are at risk than the ones that are typically developing if they're not getting that exposure? So that was one of the things that's kind of helping and kind of cool. I'm going to move now to the Apollo type effort. So if you look in the field for Apollo, you might ask, well, who funds NASA? And well, NASA gets funded, but NASA doesn't have any budget whatsoever for history or archiving. So they're not allowed to spend any money to promote themselves. They're already looking, where are we today and where are we going tomorrow? And anything that happened back, they can't actually put something there and say, we're proud that we went to the moon. You'll never see NASA do that because that's not in their charter. They're not allowed to do that. And so if we're looking at the audio, I wanted to look at team-based communications. And after like Hurricane Katrina, for example, in New Orleans and South Texas, or 9/11, you look at major issues or major catastrophes or I don't want to say issues, major events that might have required many people to talk and work together. Can you get access to that? And the reality, like for 9/11 in New York City, there's lots of cell phone communications, but you can't get access to them and they're not synchronized at all. So when I was looking to try and put this proposal into NSF back in 2010, I said, well, I always saw as a kid, NASA, all these folks sitting in mission control, and they all had headsets. It was in the 60s, so like that had to be recorded somehow. So I asked NASA, and they said, yeah, we got all those recordings. So I put the proposal into NASA or into NSF and said, we want to do this. And they thought, well, this is actually a pretty cool thing. Let's go and let's see if we can go and do this. So NSF said, yes, we'll fund it. And then I went down to NASA, or let me just kind of highlight there. So Apollo missions, Apollo 1, if many of you are too young to know this, but Apollo 1 was unfortunately the 3 astronauts in Apollo 1 died in the capsule. Unfortunately, a fire broke out in the capsule during a test firing, and they couldn't open the hatch up quick enough to get the astronauts out. One of the things that got invented by NASA after that is, if you look at zippers, you can't have anything metal in space because there they have pure oxygen inside, so they didn't want anything to create static. So I guarantee you everyone here has something that has Velcro on it. Velcro was invented by NASA to replace zippers. So it was one of the big things that NASA did to try and move forward. So Apollo 1 was 3 astronauts passed away there. From Apollo 2 to 6, those were unmanned missions. And from Apollo 7 to Apollo 17, those were all manned missions. So these were all the astronauts that came through, and they all went up. So today, you look at the International Space Station, there's air-to-ground communications on the space station, 6 audio channels every day at 5 o'clock. woman named Karen uploads all the communications from ISS to archive.org. So you can get all the audio that happened today from the ISS. Another place that we've interacted with is this HERA, that's the human analog space. I've actually been inside this little building here. It's kind of a cool place. Imagine being put in a room where you're going to live with someone for 1 week to 6 months. And the four of you are not going to see anyone else but the four of you for 6 months. You might say, there's some people I don't want to spend the next 6 months with in a room, but these folks do, and they volunteer this. There's actually a little bell. You can't see this. When they finish, they get to ring this bell that says they got out of there. So they do all kinds of training in there. I've been in that space. We're now capturing the audio in that training space and looking at how they're trying to analyze this. The way NASA did this is they had these little pan and zoom cameras. They captured the audio and then they send it off for transcription. 9 months later, they'd get the audio and then they'd have to go back and talk to the training people to say, what were they thinking 9 months ago? And no one remembers it. So being able to get the audio now actually would be a good thing. Mission control is set up here. If you're looking at the Apollo missions, Apollo or NASA launches their rockets from Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. They launch from there. Cape Canaveral has control of the rocket for the first 10 minutes. After that, it reverts to Johnson Space Center in Houston. And so Johnson Space Center is the smaller mission control room. This is the room that basically runs everything. And there's back rooms. So behind each of the people sitting in here, there's a back support room staff. There's these people are sitting there kind of providing all the technical support. And then you have the astronauts that are actually flying out into space. And, whenever someone thinks NASA, they think of those astronauts and yeah, they're the heroes, I guess. But if you look at all the support staff, there may be 1,000 people working in the background. And we call these the heroes behind the heroes because they're kind of maybe introverted, geeky type folks that are really smart and they do great things, but they don't want to be in the limelight. So the challenge there is that all of that audio was recorded on that little thing up in the upper right-hand corner. It's called SoundScriber. And that was a challenge for me, but I'll note that in a moment here. This is mission control, and this was actually built specifically for the Apollo program. John F. Kennedy signed the declaration to commit the funds to have, the U.S. go to the moon. And this is Greg Weissman. Greg looks a little bit older today, but that's what he was looking at when we took this picture years and years ago. And you can see this little yellow cord along here. If you're looking at that yellow cord, that's a really robust piece of scientific equipment. What that yellow cord is, if you go on a long trip and you want to put luggage on your roof, there's this elastic thing called a bungee cord that you stick on that. That's a bungee cord, okay? And so he had that in there in order to have the right pressure onto the rollers that actually move the tape. This thing was built in the 1960s, and that's the only unit that was there. So when we got this project, we said, all right, we're going down to Houston. I drove down with 5 of my students. We expected them to give us a whole bunch of hard disks of all the audio that was digitized. And they said, well, there's the SoundScriber system. And then they took us to this other room. They said, well, here are all the tapes. Do what you need to do. And they walked away. I thought, this is not so good. And I looked at the recorders there, the heads. It's a single track head. The tape here is a 17-hour tape. When you digitize that tape, it takes 17 hours. You play it in real time. So that one tape is going to take 17 hours to record one channel. There's 30 channels on this tape. It means you have to run that tape 30 times. That means in 1 month, you can digitize one tape. At that rate, it would take 172 years to digitize the Apollo program. So it wasn't an option. So I said, well, we're going to figure this out. I went and designed a 3-track read head. That's what you see in the picture right here. And we had that built. I paid $5,000 for that. And I went down to NASA and we said, well, we want to test this out. And it seemed to work okay. We went back and then we designed a 30-track read head. So, we're speech technology people. Now we're actually designing like electromagnetic field stuff. You have to look at the spacing between all this. And so we had to really get back into like electromagnetic fields to design this thing. And I found a company in New Jersey, my stomping grounds, that could build this thing. And we had them build it for us. They sent it to us. I went back down to NASA. I was hoping they have an engineer that actually knew what they were doing, and they said, here, we'll install it for you. But they said, their sound scriber, do what you need to do. And the scary thing is they never asked me, do you know what you're doing? They never asked that. And so my student Twan was with me, and Twan said, Dr. Hansen, I can't do this. And I said, well, I worked as a technician when I was an undergrad. I put myself through school, being paid $1.75 an hour. I said, I've done a lot in electronics. I think I can do this. And so I literally was myself underneath rewiring this machine. This was all like on the right-hand side here. This is an analog amplifier with tubes, 480 volts. You stick your hand up in the wrong spot, you're not walking away from that. The right-hand side is the playback system from the 1960s. So I rewired this myself, and we got it to work. And so, this is some of the audio we've pulled off. So let's see if we play this.
330, 6 plus 25, throttle down, 6 plus 2.
Okay, so you.
Give us a reading on the 1202 program alarm.
So you're hearing the 1202 program alarm. The 1202 program alarm was for Apollo 11 when Neil Armstrong separated from the lunar orbiter. He forgot to turn off one of the computers that were on the lunar lander. So the battery power is being drawn twice as fast as it should have been, and they didn't know it. So it generated this panic, and NASA reached out to try and figure out why is the power going down so quickly, and they realized that Neil didn't turn off the power. So that's some of the audio that we pulled off. Understand that NASA recorded all this. It sat in these tapes and literally went to the National Archives, and it had been sitting there for 50 years. No one has ever pulled them off. So all the audio that we're pulling off on this has all been brand new stuff. So this is the diarization pipeline that we have. The astronauts kind of talk to the capsule communicator, Capcom. They talk to the flight director. The flight director talks to all the flight specialists. There's some backroom support people there, but all that gets recorded on these 30 tracks. Our diarization pipeline, speech activity detection, feature extraction. We do speaker clustering, then we identify content there. We pass that up to the diarization pipeline. We get full speech recognition engine, keyword spotting, and other speaker ID tracking stuff. All that information kind of gets generated. Because I'm running out of time here, I'm gonna unfortunately have to skip past this, but Shrey, one of our students, he's one of the folks that's working on the recognition system here. So this was a feature refinement approach, end-to-end based system that was using the self-supervised learning representation. So any of you that have interest in this, I can talk some more afterwards when this is over. But we look here at some feature combinations using affine transform. A linear projection is one approach, and then weighted sum is another approach that we can kind of use to combine and build better features as opposed to just concatenating them. The next part here is we're looking at the features before projection. You can see there's very little correlations amongst here. Everything is kind of flat. It's telling you that all the data is being weighted equally. So this is using Hubert and the weight to VEC2 utterance characteristics there. This is with Wall Street Journal type data. And if you now look at on the left, that's without feature refinement, and on the right, that's with feature refinement. And what you're seeing here is a lot of the colors are either blue or red. So that's telling you that now the features are now much more correlated, either positively or negatively. So that's a good thing. It's telling us that the network is actually now learning these things in a much better way, as opposed to being more generic and neutral for everything. So it kind of pushes the network into better characterizing speaker traits when you're looking at the recognition side. So on the feature refinement side, we've got the cross correlation matrix here. There's a feature refinement loss that we have. You could see from the matrix here. This is the refinement. And so the final loss product here has the typical ASR loss, but then we have a weighted feature refinement type term in here. So now you can start to balance how the loss is maybe used in the training and recognition side of things. Some tests here with Wall Street Journal and with the Fearless Steps corpus. We're going to skip past that. Our feature extraction, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go past this one here. These show some of the results. So the H there is with Hubert, and you can see with a language model on the eval set here, and then with Hubert and the weight to VEC2 combination that does better, weighted sum, and then linear prediction with the refinement loss. We get consistent improvement in the systems there. So this is telling us that basically if you're doing different types of combinations here with the refinement loss, you end up improving performance. This is actually running with the Fearless Steps Challenge corpus, and you can see this is without a language model, so that's why the word error rates are much higher. But we are getting improvements if you're combining qubit with the wave to VEC2, linear prediction, and then also, and the feature and the refinement loss metric that we measured in there. So pulling all that together with the Fearless Steps, this was another network, a TDNN based setup here with Kali toolkit that we were using. We had a subset of the 19,000 hours for the Apollo 11 and 13 corporate here. We added 2 additional channels. PAO is Public Affairs Officer. That's what gets transmitted out to all the news feeds. And then Capcom is the capsule communicator, and another channel were unseen channels. So this next one here just shows on the eval sets, we can see each of these, what the number of hours of data was and what the word error rates are. And you can see they're all now sitting roughly in the 28 to 40% range in that space. So that tells us where we're getting better improvements there. So next, we also can look at turn taking here. So this looks at kind of the engagement with the different speakers. So it allows us to look at conversational interactions. I'll play one example here from Buzz Aldrin. He was always kind of a joking type guy. So he's asking NASA for some help on this, so you can listen to what he's asking for.
Hey, Houston, you suppose you could turn the Earth a little bit so we could get a little bit more than just water? Roger, 11. I don't think we got much control over that. Looks like you'll have to settle for the water.
So it's Buzz Aldrin. He's asking NASA, can you rotate the Earth? Because when I look out of the spaceship, all I see is water, and I want to see some land. And NASA is basically saying, sorry, 11, you're going to have to live with just the water. We can't turn the Earth for you. But we can look at conversational turns, emotion, other factors like that. We look at sentiment. So this is the full Apollo 11 mission, 195 hours. And we tracked all the communications from the astronauts and what their emotional state was. So this is kind of a cool thing to start looking at people's emotion settings there.
What's the emotional one? We're still having a problem.
That was Apollo 13. And we are doing 13 now as well. Interesting enough, not Apollo 7, but Apollo 7, actually, there was a lot of emotion there because that's the first one where the astronauts were going to go in there. And they were really, really vocal because they didn't want to go up in a ship because the first astronauts from Apollo 1 passed away. So they wanted to be safe. So there was a lot of emotion on 7. We didn't think of that. I've got one student, Mina Chandrasekhar. She works on what's called Finding Waldo. So when we released all this data, 11,000 hours for Apollo 11 in 2017, the 50th anniversary was 2019. We started getting people calling us saying, hey, you know, we've got my uncle, my dad, my grandfather all work at NASA. He said, well, send us a picture of what they look like now and what they look like then. And we went and we're starting to pull all the audio examples that they spoke in all the background communications and setting up kind of a little wall that represents their, you know, historical archive. So it's kind of like the heroes behind the heroes. We're trying to kind of identify these things. And in the IEEE Signal Processing magazine, we've got an article coming out this month, March, on this piece. So it's kind of a cool thing because we get to see a lot of the background stuff. I will mention the CAPCOM, the capsule communicator, is always an astronaut, a trained astronaut. So the capsule communicator for 11 was Charlie Duke, and Charlie was a moonwalker on Apollo 16. And that's what he looks like today. He actually visited UTD. I was able to talk to him, and we still haven't recovered all of 16, but we're looking to get that. The other piece, we've got this challenge. So any of you that want audio, you can pull down the 100-hour corpus. That's a really simple thing to work with. It's all free. We give you that. We give you the language model. We give you scripts, Kali scripts, anything you want to use for this, go take it. We want to give it away. You want to download the full Apollo 11, all 10,000, 11,000 hours. You can download that. We'll give you the locations for that. We'll give you all the transcripts, anything that we generated. You can start with that, work with any of this. So we've done this. 160 teams worldwide have pulled this down and used it for the challenges. These show kind of the leaderboards here on the 5 different tasks we typically have. These show all the different dots of different places. I want to say, I think we should have, we have someone from Hopkins here that definitely participated in this in the past. I'm sure of this. Yeah, so yeah, so we had folks that, so, you know, now the best channel on this, I think that relates maybe to more commercial stuff is the PAO, because PAO is public affairs. They're always taught, there's always commercials in there. You also get any types of things that are going on with TV and radio, those things are coming out there. So we've had probably about 50 different news agencies, TV stations kind of come by and interview us and kind of do stuff. We've had many students involved with that. That's all been cool. Okay. We did one satellite uplink with the International Space Station. So this was with high school students in Dallas and one of our congresswomen there. So that was involved there. We used all the audio and gave it to CNN. So it's all part of, they used all in the movie. So all the audio that you see for the Apollo 11 movie came from our group. And our students got a movie credit for that. So that's kind of a cool thing they have in their resume. Last thing I'll just mention here, audio and video. That movie, they had the video, but no audio. It was silent 80mm film. So the audio, I'm going to show you the video here. We sent all the audio and work we did to CNN. They stitched them together. So this shows an example there.
Hey Don, do you think you drove that antenna to the stops? Probably. Want him to make sure, check the breakers?
Yeah, we can have him confirm those breakers. Sure.
So you kind of know that you're not looking at a video of someone, because when they videotaped it, they only had the silent movie stuff. You're hearing the audio of what that person is saying, but you're also hearing what that person hears in his headset. So it had to be a completely different audio. So you're literally taking something from here and here and stitching them together. And so when the students went to see this in the movie houses, they were like shocked that the stuff that they were working on was actually being used up there, and they could see that the school got the credits for that. Website here, exploreapollo.org. You can listen to any of the audio. We have stuff you can download from there. Preservation of history. We got a new grant that's ongoing right now, CCRI grant for recovering all the audio. Those are some of the tapes there. So I'm going to stop there. I will mention NASA, John Stahl and Greg Weissman. These two guys have been like the most supportive guys in allowing us to get in there and get access to them. And we've had a couple of famous folks. If you know who Margot Shatterly is, she wrote the book Hidden Figures. Her dad was a rocket scientist at NASA Langley in the 60s. Not an easy thing to do if you're an African-American male. But she visited UTD and gave a talk there. And we've had one of the Hidden Figures actually visit. And we had them holding up one of the Apollo tapes that they were involved in the communication side of that. So I'm going to stop there and say thank you very much for your time and appreciate the opportunity. Anyone want to go to space? Yeah. I don't know. I think if you're a billionaire, it's pretty easy to find hitch a ride somewhere. But I go, oh, this is being recorded. Billionaires are nice. Yeah, they should donate to Johns Hopkins all the money they want to, right? But yeah.
Question, John, about the Apollo tape, right?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that there must be a lot of technical jargon as well in addition to, some of the control arm or something you mentioned. Did NASA also give you some documentation and which you track vocabulary?
So yeah, so it depends on which channels. When you're dealing with public affairs office or PAO, that's always going to ABC, CBS, NBC for TV and for video, for radio and TV. There are other ones that are more kind of high level, like the flight director. The flight director, he's talking high level type stuff. So you got to realize there's 2 historical recorders, actually 60 channels that are being recorded simultaneously. So you can find channels that are really like techno geeky stuff. They're using acronyms. So if you say, I have one video, it says, consumables are good on CDR. So consumables means oxygen. You're going to have oxygen if you're in space. CDR is commander. Commander for 11 was Neil Armstrong. So they would use acronyms in order to reduce the amount of talk time because other people were talking in the system. So we were able, when we built the original language model for the first release here from 2011 to 2016, we pulled 4.2 billion words to build our language model. And we give that away. So that text, anything about Apollo, about Gemini, anything about the International Space Station, anything that we could find that was NASA related, we pulled that in. So yes, there are some channels that have lots of technical discussion, but there are other channels that are much more, I would say, open discussion. And it's interesting because when you look at the early Apollo missions, maybe 6 to like 13, you had well, not 13, let's say because of the issue with 13, but maybe up to 12. They're a lot more structured. When you look at Apollo 14 to 17, it's much more, I wouldn't say common, but you hear a lot more like discussions, like one of the capsule communicators on, I think, the later missions was talking about, his experiences in Colombia, the country of Colombia, and one of the lunar orbiters was named Colombia. So he talks for almost 15 minutes about his experiences there. So you get a lot more, I wouldn't say casual, a lot more spontaneous conversational stuff, right? Yeah.